Chapter 4. The Chances. The percent of women who are marriageable. If you had tried dating in the past 25 years, you know that it has not only been difficult, but increasingly so. And while many people, both men and women, may date for fun, inevitably the majority of people date with the end goal of marriage, and perhaps forming a family. But while men's and women's biological drives compel them towards this evolutionary goal, society, in a bevy of ways, has delayed, postponed, even outright obstructed men and women from achieving this goal. This has come in the form of making college an unnecessary condition of employment, crippling young people with student debt so they can't afford a family, indoctrinating young women to put more value on their careers and education than men/children/family/love, obesity that has rendered 70% of people physically revolting, and a war of the sexes that makes cancer seem friendly. Both sexes, women for men and men for women, have been ruined for each other by society, resulting in abysmally few people who are marriage material. And you didn't need a study to tell you that. But how do you measure, quote, marriage material? How do you determine whether a woman is of high enough caliber to marry? And what traits would you consider to make this judgment? There are no correct answers, but this study employs 3 methods to estimate the percent of the female population that is marriageable. 1. The Dealbreaker Method. 2. The Online Dating Profile Survey Method. And 3. The Dates Per Marriage Method. An average of all 3 will then be used for this piece of the ROI puzzle. Method number 1. The Dealbreaker Method. The Dealbreaker Method attempts to measure, based on surveys, polling, and other data, what percent of the American female population has no major deal breakers. What qualifies as a deal breaker is certainly up for debate. Loudly smacking her chewing gum may be considered a deal breaker for some, but not at the same level as, say, a woman with herpes. So, to determine what were critical deal breakers that would indeed disqualify a woman from being marriage material, we had to focus on critical flaws that were not merely unlikable, but would make a happy marriage an impossibility. And while no doubt this list could be unlimited, we focused on 8 deal breakers deemed to be the most poignant, comprehensive, and relevant to the success of a happy marriage, as well as the interests of men. Number 1. Obesity/being overweight. Despite what fat acceptance activists and an increasing percent of American women want to believe, being big is not beautiful. It is disgusting, it's gross, it's physically revolting, and it just so happens it's unhealthy. But more importantly, as it pertains to whether a woman is marriage material, it immediately destroys the number 1 thing men seek in women: physical beauty. And though women may howl at the moon and claim that a man should love a woman for who she is on the inside, we already have a name for women we like but just aren't physically attracted to: friends. Regardless, since physical beauty is a must, this eliminates the 59.6% of young American women who are obese or overweight as marriage material. Certainly, yes, many men are fat themselves, and yes, many men marry fat women, have wives who get fat on them, or even manage to have kids with them. But remember, the definition of success in this study is happily married, and you simply cannot be happily married to somebody you're not physically attracted to. Number 2. Worthless degrees. While the world celebrates that there are now more women in college than men, nobody has bothered to ask whether it's for something sensible like accounting or a colossal waste of time like the liberal arts. And when you consider whether the degrees women are getting are worthwhile or merely an excuse to attend a very expensive 4-year party, unfortunately, 80.5% of the time, it's an excuse to party. However, it is not so much the degree itself that excludes women from being marriage material, as it is what it comprehensively says about them. First, it's a declaration as to how realistic and serious women are about their careers, their professions, and their work ethic. Yes, it would be nice to solve poverty, but usually when a young woman majors in the social sciences, it's to avoid real work or rigor. At minimum, a delusion to follow her heart and the money will follow. You will be subsidizing her life as she simply lacks the education and skills to command a self-supporting wage. Second, there are huge financial consequences for majoring in the wrong thing. Namely, the tonnage of student debt she's incurred and unable to pay off, making her a huge financial liability for any future suitor. Third, many of these worthless degrees are simply rank indoctrination, brainwashing women to value their careers, politics, feminism, educations, etc. above love, which is simply antithetical to marriage. If you marry someone with a gender studies degree, they are not going to be a loving or supporting wife, but likely an obstinate, nagging shrew that loves her cultish politics and career more than you or your children. This isn't to say a nice, sweet girl who's majoring in education to become an elementary school teacher is going to be some nagging, confrontational harpy. Nor is it to say that every girl who goes to college, only 72.5% of women do. But it is to use women's choice of majors as a proxy as to where their priorities in life lie, how realistic they are about finances, how realistic they are about life, as well as the chances they will be a political, financial, or even emotional liability to your marriage. The data for worthless degrees was calculated using the NCES data for all bachelor degrees conferred in 2018. Every degree that did not have an obvious job or profession attached to it or were notoriously underpaid professions, education, sociology, etc., or were typically unaccredited degrees that target poor/disadvantaged groups of students, criminal justice, culinary school, etc., were deemed worthless. Number 3. Percent financially delinquent. As financial problems are cited as the #1 cause of divorce, finding a woman who has her financial act together is a must. Furthermore, a woman who cannot pay her bills on time is simply not mature enough to marry. And while no doubt young women today have the added financial pressures of student loans for completely unemployable degrees, no self-respecting man can marry a woman who doesn't pay her bills, or worse, is one of the 6% who declares bankruptcy, upgrading themselves to thieves. Using ever delinquent as the metric in a Federal Reserve study to determine fiscal responsibility, 31.6% of women between the ages of 18 to 35 have been late at least once paying back their debts. Men are only a few percentage points better, but nearly 1 in every 3 women of marrying age have finances that are prohibitive to marriage. This leaves roughly only 2/3 of women fiscally responsible, and presumably responsible enough to marry. Data was an average between 2 age cohorts from 21 to 30 and 31 to 40. Number 4. Leftist/socialist/feminist politics. While one could make the argument, and be right, that leftist or feminist politics shouldn't be considered a deal-breaker, there are Democrat men, after all. Leftist politics are considered a deal-breaker in that they play a role in young women's lives today that goes beyond mere government policy, to that of a political ideological cult that renders many of them unmarriageable. In the 1960s, when your mother or grandmother, even your curmudgeonly grandfather would vote Democrat, it was usually to nobly help out the little guy, or to perhaps reel in the powers of corporate America. And whether you agreed with them or not, it was to exercise their right to vote and to do their part to make America as great as it could be. But for whatever reason they voted Democrat, it wasn't because they solely valued themselves as, quote, Democrats, or derived some kind of life purpose and meaning from it. They were a housewife or a plumber first, who happened to vote for JFK. But today, left-leaning politics, and certainly feminism, is not about giving the little guy a break or something as mundane as balancing the budget. It has become a substitute for purpose, meaning, value, and even love in many young women's lives today. So much so, many young women will simply refuse to date non-leftists as a matter of policy, screaming, "Swipe left if you're a Republican," when, in fact, you might be a libertarian. This makes politics, like other things, a higher priority in leftist women's lives than love. And to truly fall in love, let alone be happily married, you need to put the other person ahead of yourself, and that includes your cultish politics. But worse, this unhealthy obsession with politics, as well as abusing it as a substitute for purpose in life, has many young women flirting with mental illness where they literally hate you because you dare advocate lower taxes or refuse to use made-up pronouns. Therefore, it is not the political positions of the Democrat Party, socialism, or feminism per se that makes these women unmarriageable, but the fact that they put it at the center of their lives that renders them so. And though this ideological obsession provides left-leaning men huge statistical advantage when it comes to dating, as 65% of young women today identify as Democrat or feminist, it will forever sow a seed of doubt as to whether your leftist wife loves you or her politics more. Number 5. Single moms. This variable is very simple. Men don't like raising other men's children. Men are genetically repulsed by other men's genes. Men are not kosher with being the number 2 guy in a woman's life, let alone playing second fiddle to some other guy's kid. And unless the woman was a widow, being a single mom is indicative of poor decision-making in the past. Admittedly, if you're an older man, you may not have the luxury to pine for, let alone hold out for, a childless woman. Over time, most women will have children, and with a 50% divorce rate, single moms are an inevitability in every middle-aged man's life. But since this study focuses on younger men who are yet to be married, as well as young women who are not at menopause's door, it is perfectly reasonable and self-respecting to demand your future wife not have another man's kid. Unfortunately, what you want and what you're going to get are two different things, as nearly 40% of single women between the ages of 18 to 35 are single moms. Worse, the better looking a woman is, the higher percent chance she has a kid in tow. This phenomenon was particularly noticeable when surveying online dating profiles in rural areas. The fact is, whether you like it or not, beautiful women attract handsome men, and the result is children. Sometimes these people stay married, sometimes they don't, sometimes they were never married at all. But the end result is the average young man today is looking at a dating pool where 4 in every 10 women have some other guy's kid. Number 6. STDs. STDs present an interesting problem. What is considered an STD? Is it HPV, which nearly half the population will get, yet for the most part is asymptomatic? Is it a death sentence like AIDS? What if it's curable, like gonorrhea or chlamydia? What if it's not, like herpes? It's hard to pin down what a deal-breaking STD is. Furthermore, there are complications when it comes to measuring an STD rate among young women. For instance, the data just doesn't exist for the specific age cohort we're interested in. Different diseases come and go in waves over generations, making a stable, usable number an impossibility. And a significant percent of the female population has multiple STDs. There is, frankly, no way to apply a specific number to the percent of women who have a marriage-disqualifying STD. Therefore, for the purposes of this study, a marriage-disqualifying STD was conservatively defined as whether a woman had herpes or not. There are certainly some shortcomings in using this metric, but having herpes is a pretty applicable standard when it comes to marriageability. Most men will adamantly refuse to marry, let alone sleep with, a woman who knowingly has herpes. Herpes is not curable, and there's enough social stigma associated with the disease, it's a death knell for your dating life, and, consequently, your chances of marriage. A shocking 25% of women are estimated by the CDC to have herpes, even though the vast majority of these women are asymptomatic. And remember, that's just one STD. The percent of women with deal-breaking STDs is likely higher. Number 7. Mental illness. Like STDs, mental illness also presents a measuring and statistical problem. Do you consider women who ever had a mental illness? Do you only consider women who are chronically mentally ill? Do you consider something serious and permanent like schizophrenia? What about something as minor as dyslexia? Does the suite of designer mental illnesses millennials popularized to get attention in high school count? What about ADHD or social anxiety disorder? And who cares if she's faking being bipolar for attention? Isn't that in itself a deal breaker for most men? Like STDs, an assumption had to be made to simplify the math and just get us into the ballpark. This assumption was that the 25% of women who are on antidepressants are a reflective, though low-end, estimate of the overall population of women who are mentally ill to the point that they are unqualified to be wives. Number 8. Body mutilation. The final deal breaker was body mutilation. Like STDs and mental illness, this was also amorphous and intangible. However, mutilating one's body is a pretty clear sign of several things: mental illness, bad decision-making skills, immaturity, financial instability, a lack of purpose and meaning in life, and conformity, especially among women from 18 to 35. Additionally, physically marring your body not only ruins the number one thing men seek in women, beauty, but can also be visually identified, making it an easily identifiable red flag for any serious seeker of marriage. But like other metrics, what qualifies as body mutilation? Is the discreet Chinese proverb tattoo nearly every 20-something girl has a sign of mental illness? Are the tramp stamps nearly every Gen X woman got the same? And what if she was a military vet and got the tattoo with her unit in Iraq? Therefore, for the purposes of this study, body mutilation was considered somebody who had 4 or more tattoos. Non-traditional piercings or other forms of body mutilation, ear gauges for example, were not considered, largely because there isn't enough data about the female population that has them. But there is research, see below, showing the more tattoos women have, the more mentally unstable they are, rendering them, for the purpose of this analysis, unmarriageable. Nearly 1 in 6, 15.3%, of the female population is estimated to have 4 or more tattoos. Backing out dependence/co-correlation and finalizing the number. When you tally up the numbers above, you get the following statistics. Here you can see a chart in the PowerPoint. And while you may be tempted to merely multiply these variables together to get the remaining percent of the female population without a major deal breaker, which would result in 0.54%, roughly 1/2 of 1% of the female population, this number is misleading because of the co-correlation between these 8 deal breakers. For example, it may shock you to find out that a feminist with a worthless degree might also have 4 or more tattoos, have financial problems, be on antidepressants, and also be fat. This results in a Venn diagram where one woman can account for several of these traits, overstating the percent of the female population that is unmarriageable and understating the percent of the female population that is. To account for this overlap, 2 statistical methods were employed to back out this co-correlation. These methods resulted in 2 estimates of the marriageable population, 1.1% and 1.4%, averaging to around 1.25%. This adjusted number is the finalized number we will be using for method number 1 in calculating the percent of marriageable women, 1.25%. Method number 2, the online dating profile survey method. To get the second number used to measure what percent of the female population was marriageable, a more direct route was taken. I merely borrowed my friend's Match.com account and went through 900 profiles of women, asking the simple question, does she have any major deal breakers? These 900 profiles were sampled over 3 states and within each state further divided across city, suburb, and rural zip codes at 100 samples each. The 3 states/major metros were Dallas, Texas, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Denver, Colorado. So, using Texas as an example, 100 profiles were sampled from Dallas, 100 profiles sampled from Plano, a suburb, and 100 profiles were sampled from Van Horn, a rural area. This methodology was repeated in Minnesota and Colorado as well. Simple and direct as this method may have been, it was not without its challenges. First, most online dating services, or apps, do not have those same 8 deal breakers conveniently listed on a woman's dating profile. This required spending hours poring over the details, reading hundreds of individual profiles, to see if there were any deal breakers. Second, online profiles are not totally disclosing, meaning just because she didn't mention prescription meds didn't mean she wasn't mentally ill. This means this method likely understates the number of women with deal breakers, and thus overstates the percent of marriageable women. Third, women put in an amazing amount of trickery and deception when it comes to their pictures. Blurry pictures, pictures from far away, pictures where she's wearing sunglasses so you can't see her face, pictures where she's in a group of women making it impossible to tell who she is. Some women didn't even post pictures at all, but instead pictures of landscapes or painfully stupid calligraphic sayings. And the amount of close-up facial shots, pictures from 1996 or outright Photoshop jobs, was appalling. It was assumed that any kind of trickery when it came to pictures was merely a fat woman trying to hide the fact that she was fat, resulting in a hard no in the analysis. Still, 1 week and 900 profiles later, the results were very eye-opening about the world of online dating. Apparently, all children of single moms not only come first, but are all also amazing. Surprisingly, there are no average or stupid kids in America, only amazing. Nearly every girl likes to travel, despite the unpleasant chore we all know traveling to be. A lot of women are done playing games and ready to settle down, which when translated into English means we're not having any of that fun, frivolous sex I gave to all the previous fellas. Nearly everyone is a fur mama to a fur baby. For some women, notably in Texas, Jesus is not just merely important, but super important. Most women are bilingual as they are fluent in sarcasm. And a good percent of women are apparently criminals because they're all looking for their partner in crime. Still, out of all the cliched and banal dating profiles, there were 50 quite admirable women who had no obvious deal breakers, and, at least on paper, looked to be of marriage material. These 50 women accounted for 5.4% of the 900 profiles surveyed. This is the finalized number for method number 2 in calculating the percent of marriageable women: 5.4%. It should be noted that this 5.4% figure likely overstates the percent of marriageable women in that not all deal breakers can be ascertained in a mere dating profile. It is acknowledged that Match.com is only one dating site and more modern dating sites/apps are in use, notably Bumble and Tinder. However, these apps have very limited data on their profiles as each profile must fit on a phone screen. It is also acknowledged that online dating is not the only source for dates. One can meet a girl in public. However, especially under COVID, nearly all dating is done online today, especially for the age demographic of 18 to 35. Therefore, Match.com is assumed to be reasonably representative of the true dating market men face today. Method number 3. The dates per marriage method. The third method used to estimate the percent of marriageable women is actually quite simple. It simply asks how many women men date before they marry. You take the number of wives men have had, divided it by the total number of women they've dated, and that should give us a rough approximation of the percent of women men deem marriageable. There were several problems with this measure. First, the polling was highly unscientific, fraught with selection bias and other common polling errors. Additional data on this would be tremendously helpful in improving this study. Secondly, this ratio most certainly overstates the percent of marriageable women in that men have presumably already selected for beauty when asking women on dates, not randomly asking out random girls in public regardless of their physical appearance. However, third, this is ameliorated by the fact that this measure does not account for the instances where the man wanted to get married, but the woman did not, yet still resulted in a date. Note, this effect also affects women, which will be addressed later. Fourth, the distribution was bimodal, where the majority of men had dated 10 or less women before marrying, though the mean average was brought up significantly by serial daters, men who had dated in excess of 100 women. You can see a chart in the PowerPoint. When the total amount of dates was divided by the total amount of marriages, the average man will date 67 women in their life before marrying, implying only 1.5% of women are deemed marriageable by men. And while an argument could certainly be made to back out the serial daters are nonetheless part of the dating community. Plus, they technically have statistically sampled those women. Furthermore, various dating sites, dating coaches, as well as serial daters themselves have anecdotally reported a rule of thumb of only 1 in every 100 women being marriageable, roughly corroborating the data above. Still, it is acknowledged that if we considered a median number of dates instead of the mean, this number would be significantly higher. But for the sake of analysis, we will stick with the 1.5%. This is the finalized number for method number 3 in calculating the percent of marriageable women: 1.5%. The final number for the percent of women who are marriageable. Taking the three estimates from the three methods, the Dealbreaker Method, 1.25%, the Online Dating Profile Survey Method, 5.4%, the Dates Per Marriage Method, 1.5%, we get a simple average of 2.72%, or 1 in every 37 American women who do not have a major deal breaker. This 2.72% is the first of the 3 variables we will need to calculate the percent chance you will be happily married, aka what you're going to get.